You're listening to episode 10 of the Happy Space podcast. Today we're talking about hiring for neurodiversity with Keith Isaac of TD Bank Group. Welcome to the Happy Space podcast, a place where highly sensitive people thrive. Not only will we learn how to better navigate life with our superpowers, we'll find ways to better manage the challenges too. We'll hear from product and service innovators, space designers, and leaders who believe in creating an inclusive, neurologically safe world. If you're highly sensitive or want to better understand and support someone who is, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Clare Kumar, and I'm so very happy you're here. I was speaking with a journalist recently about my passion for inclusivity and sustainable performance, and how highly sensitive people are, however, often marginalized and invited to opt out or burn out. And her ears perked up when I made the connection between high sensitivity and the neurodivergent mind. So, neurodivergency is getting to be more well understood. And there is some interesting work, very powerful work underway right now at one of Canada's top 5 banks, one of North America's top 10 banks, TD Bank Group. They are very proud of their focus on diversity and inclusion. Let me read you a statement on their website. It says, diversity and inclusion are part of our fundamental values that help us support our customers, colleagues, and communities. From our hiring practices to accessible design, we're working towards maintaining a welcoming, barrier-free culture for everyone. And I just want to celebrate that barrier-free culture because having that mission is going to open the doors for inclusivity for a lot of people, and the neurodivergent and highly sensitive are amongst those. There's also an article, in case anyone's interested in finding it, the case for changing the way you hire, which is what we dig into in this episode. In this podcast, I'm speaking with Keith Isaac. He's the VP, Vice President of Capital Markets Risk Management for TD Bank Group. And he's got new practices within his organization to help him to adopt and recruit and onboard neurodivergent people. So tune in to find out what prompted Keith to really become a champion in his organization for this effort. See how many people have been onboarded and are in the company right now and the impact that that's had. Find out more than why this is the right thing to do, why it's a business imperative. I hope you'll enjoy this episode. Today's episode of the Happy Space podcast is sponsored by clarekumar.com. Not only am I excited to spearhead the Happy Space movement, I love coaching busy professionals to achieve greater productivity and well-being. The two go hand in hand. I also adore taking the stage. If you're looking for an interactive, engaging event to inspire and invite action, whether it be on successful work-life integration, sustainable performance, organization and productivity, or expanding inclusivity, please visit clarekumar.com and find out more. Oh, and if you haven't already joined the Happy Space Pod, it's our complimentary online community. You'll find it right at clarekumar.com/happyspace. So, Keith, thanks for joining me today, and I'm thrilled that you'll be able to share the inspiring things that you and your company are doing with TD Bank Group. I'm really hoping you can just explain for listeners what the initiative has been so far. Maybe just give us a bit of a description, and then we'll dig
Right.
into it a little bit more.
So I'll start out saying TD is well recognized for inclusion and diversity, and that's in all pillars, in all areas, whether it's race or gender or sexual orientation, and also bringing on people with individuals with diverse abilities. I think we're undergoing a bit of a branding change. It was called peoples with disabilities first, but I like the newer one, which is individuals with diverse abilities. So. Uh, Looking for different ways of increasing our diversity in our workforce. So
Yeah.
this was one initiative that was we partnered. I think the first, I can't take credit for being the first. TD Insurance was the first in 2016 to do
Okay.
a cohort with Specialty Startup. So Specialty Startup is a Danish organization.
Mhm.
It's a Danish from specialists, and the mission is a million jobs. And essentially, it's focusing on those on the autism spectrum and with other neurodivergence. So we're using the term neurodivergent now because everybody is neurodiverse. Doesn't tell you anything. So this way, it's a better descriptor. So they had started that in 2016, and
Mhm.
the way we had it organized is generally depending on what segment you're in. There are the individual diversity pillars, and then there's usually a segment group that does things within those pillars. So I was on, I am on the risk pillar,
Mhm.
and so it was a sort of a no brainer. I saw a webinar around what the experience was in the first cohort, and I have a tie to autism because my daughter's on the spectrum. So it was a very natural thing for me to say, okay, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I can, be the executive sponsor of the risk cohort, which was in 2017. And in
Right.
that cohort, we brought on 8 people. So I solicited 6 roles alone into my own team, and then there were 2 other risk roles in there.
Wow.
And
How big is your team then? So 6 people out of
but 250.
wow. Wow.
Yep.
That's awesome.
But that was the first cohort. So now I've
Mhm.
hired, yeah, in the intervening space over 20.
Wow.
Alone, and then the bank is now approaching about 50 altogether. So it's been great.
Amazing. So I just applaud that that effort because yes, this the way you phrase it, individuals with diverse abilities. As a productivity coach, I talk a lot about productivity being personal, and we need diverse ways of thinking. I mean, the science around diverse voices leading to richer solutions is well documented and well proven. So you mentioned a personal connection with your daughter. And I've also looked at other backgrounds of people who have been champions with organizations. And how does that influence your proclivity or your appetite to say, put your hand up and say, "Oh, this totally makes sense." How did you connect the dots there?
Well, it's easy to see the potential, and it's easy to see how she could be otherwise othered or put into a box and saying, well,
Yeah.
all of the I think if you look back to Rain Man, right, which was at the time a very sort of ahead of its time movie, but it was a
Yes.
double edged sword because it really characterized almost all autistic people, as someone who was Dustin Hoffman's character. But the
Mhm.
reality is, one person with autism, one person with autism. So everybody's different, has different strengths. It is a
Yes.
spectrum. I like the way, we go right from saying linear. People like to use the term, well, you know, high functioning or low functioning. And it's not an accurate descriptor because you can be very high functioning, in terms of how you write, but no be nonverbal. And that doesn't mean you're any higher or lower. So
Yeah.
knowing what her potential was, knowing, her character and all that, and seeing, turning around and seeing what the barriers are going to potentially be for her in the future, it was a very easy leap to do that. So that's one piece. And the other part
Mm,
is what specialist trainer will tell you is yes, it's nice to do it for the people that are coming in as candidates, but
mm,
it's also, bringing in that diverse viewpoint from other points of view,
mhm.
those who are neurodivergent. It's actually an advantage to business because you are having people look at problems in a different way.
Right. So moral imperative, business imperative, the 2 go hand in hand, and that's what
They do.
I'm hoping leaders who are listening take away from our conversation is that there's the potential here to include minds that, as you say, they might have been othered. And in the corporate world, what did that look like thus far? Without this modification and adjustment
Well, it's still there.
reimagining.
So I mean, it's
Mm,
this is we're still, there's still an organization called Special Certa because there needs to be. I mean, hopefully
mhm,
the future is you don't need one because then, all of the HR, it's really HR processes really around recruitment, onboarding, and then inclusion within the workforce in general. And,
mhm,
it's actually easier to make smaller tweaks than it is to actually have those individuals come in and try to conform to whatever is supposed to be the workplace norms, right? And,
mhm,
and the workplace has built up barriers in a lot of different ways, whether it comes from the job description,
mm,
which has, always contains jargon, colloquialisms, things that wasted things are proven leadership ability. Well, what is that actually? Right. So if I'm looking at that and I've either never had a job before, I've had one, and maybe I've, managed a yogurt shop or something like that. I said, well, I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't have that. I'm not applying. So right away,
Yeah.
that's a barrier.
I don't even think you have to be neurodivergent to not understand what that means.
Yeah.
You know,
But
like
everybody likes to put it in for whatever reason. Because if I don't put it in there, then maybe I just won't get that. Right. It makes no
yeah.
sense. Right?
Yeah. So it's taking a hard look at the HR processes from inviting people to be part of the company, then all the way through.
Mhm.
And so yeah, because if you haven't got people into the company, then they're not even part of the conversation to begin with, right?
That's right.
So, yeah, I was looking at some research because there's ADHD in my client base and in my family, and looking at that particular group and looking at the numbers of kids that, just get to the end of high school and the attrition that happens again in university. And then there's further attrition with, even investing so much effort and inability to actually get into the workforce.
Yeah.
So, could you share a little bit about maybe the kinds of changes that have happened to make that process more inclusive? So, you mentioned jargon and some of the
Yeah.
language. What else has evolved in the process of bringing people into the company?
Well, there's also reimagining the interview process because everybody's, these days, again, do we think it's the best approach to hire somebody and
Mm,
match them with a job based on a 1 hour behavioral interview?
yeah,
Um, it's really not, right? It's like, well, it's a fit and I get a feel and all these kinds of
yeah,
things, but really you're not
yeah,
necessarily matching what the strengths are, and the skill sets and the ways of working that will actually, appeal to the workforce that'll align with it. And so,
yeah.
that's another place which is a huge barrier. So again, this is a structured way of bringing people in. Back when we were
Yeah.
doing it in 2017, it was
Mm,
actually bringing, the recruitment process was looking at how individuals would build Lego robots and just watching kind of as they made the task more and more complex, how
yes.
they attended to it. And so
Yeah.
when you saw quote unquote as a blind hiring, so it was see the person just it's like they get a candidate profile and the
Right.
profile has all of the usual credentials, education,
Mm,
and experience. And it also has, what's their endurance like? How do they attend to, do they ask a lot of questions? Do they need like a lot of details before they go on to
mhm,
the next step, or they're able to take that initiative? So
mhm,
you get a sense of what that person's work style is as well, and
mm,
whether the role is the way that you think that the group would work together, and the role itself,
right.
the types of processes and whether that's a match or not.
Interesting. Does it look at all about, the amount of work that needs to be done potentially quietly on your own versus in a team environment, that like the different workspaces that come into play and work practices that fall out of that?
Well, I think you can. I think the nice thing about it is, again, the stereotype is that these should all be, behind the screen type of jobs, and because
Mm,
because everybody's coming in as introverted and they're not good
mm,
communicators, and that's you throw that out the window when you meet the
mm.
first candidate for it. Because so what they'll do is they'll bring it in. It's a 4 week onboarding process,
Okay.
and it's done in cohorts for a couple of reasons. Because there's supports, you need to
Yeah.
amortize that support over one number of people because there's a job coach that's bringing them into the workforce, right? And so the
Right.
first 2 weeks, they tend to meet in groups and do things in Scrum, and then the meantime they
Yeah.
get used to where they're going. And there's some things we just take for granted. Where's the office? Um, y- right? How do you
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah,
get
especially
there? What do you
now.
wear?
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, now it's actually this has been actually COVID has been a bit of a positive in some ways because it's actually been somewhat easier for some newer candidates to align to the workforce because it hasn't been like in your face flat days, right? So it's been a bit of an equalizer, which is very nice.
I love that, which brings up another point. Oh my gosh, there's so many things you're saying that I would just love to jump on, but,
Mhm.
um, this one of the most prevalent things that I've as a highly sensitive person and that I see in the neurodivergent community is that autonomy and having some ability to influence where and when and how we work is really critical to achieving the greatest productivity. And I'm wondering if if you're seeing that now, any differently as we've emerged through the pandemic, or we're still emerging through it, and we've had, to a large degree, a lot of autonomy, and right now there's a lot of dialogue, especially in some banking organizations, about, "I just want everything to go back to normal and want all
Yeah.
the butts in seats again," right? So what's your sense, especially working with this population and, seeing the connection to their efficacy?
Well, I don't think there's any. I mean, I've always been a believer of what of where you work, having FaceTime is not necessary
Mm,
if the job doesn't require it. So if I have a customer facing role,
yeah,
yes, I believe that there's relationships that are formed when you're meeting face to face, and it's not a deal breaker, but
yeah.
there is a more gravitation towards doing
Well,
that.
just as a thought though, I have a TD securities advisor, and our meetings are so effective on Zoom because I can see that screen she's showing me so
Right.
much better than looking over her shoulder at her desk screen, which was never really angled for me, the customer, anyway.
Correct.
So
Yep.
I'm actually having a better experience with my advisor
Mhm.
Um, working remotely. It's like we've navigated it. We've worked, everybody's comfortable on Zoom now. The lighting is good, the sound is good. We understand if there's a dog barking, we'll reschedule or we'll use crisp AI and get rid of the sound. So it's interesting because I think over the past months, the way we have accomplished or evolved to accomplish tasks has also shifted to some
Yep.
degree.
I think
Yeah.
well, I think it's great technology has been a good equalizer that way. So I do think
Yeah.
we should take advantage of it.
Yeah.
I'm not we're trying to say we don't want you to lose the concern, I guess, is that how our culture is built, right? So that
Yes.
and this is the thing that you can't get, and I don't think we're going to know for a while whether or not that there's really, there's a lot more turnover now, sort of in the last few months. The
Mm,
market's very hot for people, and a part of that is it's believed to be a part of it is because we've all been remote that our personal tie to the organization is fraying in that way. So
mhm,
you don't get to hang out with the team and all that. I don't know if
mm,
that's true or not.
mhm.
That's a feeling, and so it's easier to take. But if a headhunter calls you, it's easier to take that call because well, I've just joined the organization 2 years ago. I haven't really met any of my team. I don't really feel that I'm
Mhm.
letting anybody down, and so I can go and
Yeah.
so there's a bit of that, and it creates a bit of that transaction orientation that way. I don't
Mhm.
know whether or not that will stick or that's true or it's just a function of that's just the market or the group of people.
So
Don't know
it's
yet.
yeah, it's a big question because as we look at culture, uh, I think there's been an absence in many organizations of building time into the day to foster that connection. There's so many stories of people still eating lunch at their desk, even when they
Mhm.
were in the office, right? So it's like I think we were missing even that social connection need that we had. And yeah, certainly if somebody's joined an organization, they haven't been able to have it, but I'm not sure if it was there in the North American culture to the extent it has been in other cultures where I've worked. And in Tokyo, for example, one of the great joys of going to work, besides the work itself and the people, was we would go out to lunch every day. And
Right.
lunch in Tokyo was phenomenal and way cheaper
Mhm.
than dinner. So it was
Yeah.
like the only way to really maximize that experience.
Right.
But we made time for it. And in Europe, I hear some of the same, but it really depends. And I think we're at a pivotal moment where we can say, what kind of culture do we want to instill and really make time for and talk about in the way we construct work. And yeah, now for different people, it's going to be, oh no, thanks. I don't want to go out to a group lunch.
Right.
That's going to be uncomfortable. But maybe there's small groups, or maybe there's different ways it can emerge, but that need for social connection for most of us is there to some degree. And I think you're right. We've had especially for introverted people and potentially people on the spectrum as well, greater comfort in not being so in the spotlight, if you will. Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. I was in a meeting this morning and we were talking about the future of work. And I said, can I please be the voice of inclusivity at this table? Because in the whole return to work conversation for convenience or control issues, we need to remember that we've invited a lot more people to the party. and they've been
Yes.
making incredible contributions. So speaking about the contributions and what you've noticed, I'm curious what you've seen in your own experience bringing these 6 people first out of 250, now grown to 20 and now 50 people in the organization. What are you noticing are some of the benefits of bringing this group of people in?
Well, I think there's a benefit to the individuals is that they're learning different tasks and some of them are already becoming financial services experience. So
Mm,
they're able to, clearly it's I'm always believed, attitude to competencies is the core technical because the technical is the thing you can usually teach.
yes.
So you're usually, you're getting the right people in the door that way. I have people with sort of medical backgrounds or either that might come
Right.
in and say, well, okay, let me look. It's a complex problem. It's data related, but it doesn't have to be financial services data. So let me explain
Yeah.
to me that product and see explain the product and now they know.
Yep.
It's not a barrier in that way. So I think you realize that the talent pool is wider, is broader than you thought it was to begin with.
Ah,
Um, I think another big one is the other realization for me is this is no different a group than my neurotypicals in the sense that if I look at where they are now, right? Some of the
mhm.
people who come through the organization. So I have, on one end I have steady Eddies, who are in the same role that they were in when they joined, and
Mhm.
they're very happy and they continue to do it really, really well and
Mhm.
don't really seek to or necessarily have potential for doing other different things, but that doesn't
Yeah.
matter. That's the perfect fit. I have a ton of people who need to go and find what the next thing is. So it's really nice to have people who are willing to continue to do what they do and do it well.
Yes.
All the way to the end of having people who have been promoted and who have received legendary awards and all of that great stuff too, right? In the same
Right.
way, there's and all everything in between. So
Yeah.
you know, we you're segmenting a group, but the group is this really over a population is basically what you're seeing with neurotypical. So
Yeah.
that's on the employee side. On the
Yeah.
manager side, um, we like to think of this as universal design, right? Where you are designing processes that are uh, necessary to get the most out of the employees that you have that are neurodivergent,
Yeah.
but they're better for everybody, right?
Well, that exactly when you were describing the hiring process and taking out jargon and a 4-week onboarding process. When I
Mhm.
started way back in telecom, I remember 20 days, which is the 4 weeks
Yeah,
onboarding, training, and being part of a cohort. We had a 2-week where we were with the same 20 people, I think it was. And you really felt part of something.
yeah.
So I hope people leaders are listening because it is building this social connection, a sort of a heavy front end that will build this trust and engagement and support. And we all actually need it.
You
So,
do.
so what are we doing? How can we take some lessons from this? And do you think there might be a trickle down effect from some of this really focused work you're doing for this community and that it might have positive benefits that'll extend out of this work?
Absolutely. I mean, I've already seen it. So the other part of it, what I was going to mention, was the manager side, right?
Yeah.
So at the beginning, you were very selective about which managers you were going to have participate in the program.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, they had an inclusion. They were generally, good communicators. Like we were
Yeah.
selected because we wanted it to succeed. It was basically a pilot. Um,
Yeah.
and what they discovered, so one of the things again that this group in particular needs is clear communication. Like there isn't the like how many times have you walked out of out of a meeting with a subordinate or a superior and it's like I think I know what they want, but I'm not entirely sure because they weren't really clear about what it was they were looking for.
I have some research from Eagle Hill Consulting, and one of the causes of burnout and frustration is lack of clarity, lack of communication. It's
Yeah.
like it's in there for everybody, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
this is a must for this group. Therefore, but
Yes.
but the managers discover, well, if I
Yes.
apply the same things, the same methods of communication with
Mm.
the rest of my team, I'm getting more out of routine that way.
Yeah.
And then it's a virtuous circle. So the other managers in their
Yeah.
peer group start to see, oh, like I'm having this issue with this person or this group, or then I can't quite. Well, did you try this and did you try this? And so it trickles. So now whenever it's a cohort that's coming in and we want to add a couple of rules to it, I don't really think about who the managers are going to be because I know the managers of the team have
Right.
learned from the other managers of the team and they come with an inclusive mindset and they come with that communication. And
Yeah.
if they need a little bit of support, they get it. They get the support. But at the end of the day, they are ready, as opposed to, we don't know, we still kind of, in the old ways. So
Yeah.
it really is, it is a change for everyone, in the
Mhm.
way that the way that you do things. And it should be the way of the future, frankly, with the way of the
Yeah.
present, and then even much more ingrained. I think that's where the struggle is to, special startup is great, and but it's, you want to get to a million jobs, you need to help enable companies to do these things on their own.
Yes.
And it's taking up the
Yes.
saying, okay, well, how do we bring this, into HR, more broadly, and then we apply the
Yes.
same kinds of discipline around the job descriptions and the interview process and the diverse
Yeah.
slates and all and the onboarding pieces, that where we get that the most out of everybody. 'Cause I don't see anything in this that we're doing that is sort of throwaway, right? That, oh, it has to just be, it's an accommodation, right? These aren't really accommodations. Accommodations are very few and far between.
Yeah.
These are table stakes to get the most out of your employed managers.
Well, I'll tell you, as someone who studied productivity now for 15 years and read deeply on ADHD, everything that I learned that would help somebody with ADHD kinda helps everybody. It's just
Yeah.
like, chunking work. Yeah, breaking things down, being super clear, really navigating your calendar well. It's just, it's interesting because I don't think it's taught very well in our school system.
No.
And so if you're lucky, you've got a great role model and you watch what they do and you go, I'm gonna absorb some of that. But we've got different motivations for figuring that stuff out too. And if we're not highly motivated to figure out how to be organized,
Yeah.
oh, I know I've seen interventions from teachers and binders in school. And I'm like, oh yeah, because it's not innate for everyone.
Yeah.
If only it could be part of the way that we were thinking about helping everybody navigate systems. I mean, I guess I think of kindergarten classrooms and we have very clear instructions. We have well labeled places and we have time that embeds tidy up time. And we've got a musical cue that says everybody's going to do this now.
Yeah.
And then it falls apart after that. And you're
Yeah.
just like,
That's right.
right? And you're just left up to whatever happenstance. Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen in your organization then as a result of being bold enough to invite this way of coming in and it's like you say, it's trickling out in the HR process. Do you think there'll be anything more formal to say, oh my gosh, this needs to be a way of operating now?
I hope so. I think this, like anything else, change is hard for people, and
Hmm.
large changes, it's you really need the tone from the top to say that this is, it's just a very hard thing to do. I think just
Yeah.
as general organizational inertia, and I don't
Yeah.
speak, and I speak from a very progressive organization, right?
Hmm.
But I do think that most companies do struggle with that, to say, but we've just done this. We've always done it this way, and people are
Yeah.
very comfortable with their, call it biases, small b biases, so this is the
Hmm.
way that I've gotten to where I've gotten because I'm successful, and I've been successful because I do things this way, and so why shouldn't I change it, right?
Right.
So, I
You
think
think you think Elon's got some of that going on? It's very interesting to look at Elon as a case here, right?
yeah,
Because neurodiversity, right at play, but I think also a bias, maybe small b, maybe big B. The way I work is the way everyone should work.
yeah,
And I think that leadership bias exists in a lot of founders and a lot of, and like, it's my right to say, this is how we're going to do things and this is how we're going to do things. But it's interesting to have somebody on the spectrum, I think maybe not making room for diversity in approach to work.
yeah.
Do
I
you have
know,
any
it's
thoughts on
almost
that?
ironic. It's almost ironic. Well, I mean, I first sort of, is it a tactic or not a tactic, right? Sort of the theories are going, saying, well, he's got to fire 10% of his staff anyway, so maybe this is a
Yeah.
way that he can kind of filter things out. But I don't know. It's one of those things where, um, you've had to let go of stuff for a couple of years. So depending where you're actually at, when you step back and look at it and say,
Mm,
I'm happy where things are, or I'm not happy where things are. So,
mhm.
and if you see that as binary,
Yeah.
then I'm not happy with the way things are, then I've got to bring it back to what it used to be, because it was better back then. And so
Mm,
I don't know whether he's kind of actually saying it's, throw out the whole baby with the bathwater at the end.
yeah.
Colloquialism I shouldn't use, but along that
Yeah.
way is really just throwing everything out versus saying, okay, well, what actually has worked and
That's a
hasn't
yeah,
worked.
where's the nuance? Is is
Yeah.
sort of my question in here. And is it another good marketing ploy to just, take up some news space? But I think I think there's a leadership role there in terms of inclusivity that is completely not on the to-do list there for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it was particularly curious when you've got somebody of the community sort of
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. But
sort of
what
single check.
exactly what's worked for me is,
Yeah.
this I am a billionaire. I'm brilliant. It's because I work so hard. And so therefore you
Well,
must say,
yeah, when I was in the corporate world, it was regular, on the regular, that 10% of the workforce fell off the way and, was
well, that
invited
was the
to.
Jack Welch theory,
Right?
right?
Exactly. So
He put that
that's
in a book.
that's not really new. So
Yeah.
so but how are we going to be nuanced? I heard some research out of U of T professor this morning saying that they've done some research and segmented people who are, what will they do if their company says you must come back to work? And they segment it into the top performers down to the bottom performers. And the top two groups had the highest percentages of people that said, I'm going to take myself somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're going to say, I want to get rid of the poorest performing 10%. You might lose your top 20%. And
Yeah. Well, there's the head of machine learning was it for Apple, I think,
mhm.
didn't believe in 3 days a week in the office.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like this is kind of a universal thing. It has nothing to do with the work performance. So at your own risk, leaders, if
Absolutely.
whether you're
Yeah.
thinking this. I have one last question for you, and it's
Mhm.
it's jumping off from the point that you said um, the neurodivergent community. Yes, the specialist learner work came from autism, but then expands into all kinds of neurodiversity. And when I look at neurodiversity, I firmly include highly sensitive people in that, but there's no diagnosis. And so ADHD, there's diagnosis. For some, getting a diagnosis can sometimes be expensive and challenging and have all
Yeah.
kinds of barriers to it. How does that play into what's what's happening at TD Bank Group, and whether a diagnosis is critical or whether there's an effort to really take down barriers for anybody who might identify as neurodivergent?
So, I mean, I don't, you have to ask Alan and Chris, specialists, about
Yeah,
their intake. My
yeah.
understanding is I think it is a diagnosis that's required to get the program,
Mm.
or to get into their database, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I
Um,
will ask him. Yeah.
you can ask it.
Yeah, sure.
I do think it's a challenge when you're doing. So here's the thing, right?
Mhm.
You are working on inclusion with diversity pillars to
Yeah,
hopefully never need inclusion or diversity pillars in the future. And
right,
so, but you have to start somewhere, and everybody is very performance focused and making sure that they bring in a number of people to know, well, I do have a representation from that group. And therefore I
right.
can hope, well, they're in the
Yeah.
door, they're progressing through, they will create their own communities, and
Mhm.
and sooner or later it will, you won't need to do it anymore. Because they'll be well entrenched as part of the workforce. We no longer see it. And that's we're
Mm,
way off from that.
mhm,
Um, and so I think it's a challenge when you don't have an identifier. Um,
mhm.
but I think, the openness of the thing about what's interesting of the diagnosis also is disclosure, because we don't require people to disclose. So
Mhm.
in some cases I know they've come through specialist awareness, so I know they have some diagnosis. I don't know what it is,
Mhm.
uh, and I don't need to know. And it's
Mhm.
really up to them to even say whether they're there's individuals that I have that are happy to do podcasts, right? And to
Yeah,
say, I am neurodivergent, I'm on the autism spectrum, and
yeah,
I'm hired at TD, and this is all
yeah,
fantastic. And I have
yeah.
said that even these to the date, like, we're showing how inclusive we are, but they still don't feel comfortable.
Mm,
And so you're managing through some of those things. So I think to have to w- the main thing is if you don't have one, and you want to sort of identify in that way,
yeah,
without calling it, labeling it anything,
yeah,
is to be honest and open about the things that make you who you are and why you're a highly sensitive person. Therefore, I need X,
yeah,
Y, and Z. These are the things that make me go.
yeah,
These are the things that make me stop.
yeah,
And just be open that way. Um,
yeah.
And the hope is that you either, with the right kind of management team or peers or that are able to support you for who you are. And frankly, that's really what, even with a diagnosis, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. I have a little talk called "Never Mind the Label," which is
Yeah,
kind of what I want to get to. We want to break down barriers, not people. So
that's
that's
exactly
the
right.
that's the opportunity. Thank you so much for shedding so much light, and I'm hoping inspiring our listeners out there to really think about how you might bring this kind of initiative into your organization. I just want to leave you with one question, and this is coming back to what you might wish for your daughter as, as she grows and becomes eligible to be part of your organization or other organizations there. What do you wish that she will see when she's ready for that?
That she'll be able to do whatever she wants to do, that there won't be barriers for her,
Mhm.
that she will be, considered for any opportunity in the same way that a neurotypical would, that those biases, barriers are gone. And that
Yeah.
when she, enters the workforce, much as we think about her school, that people, um, appreciate her differences. And, I mean, that's the biggest thing I think from an inclusive society is approaching with
Yeah.
curiosity and interest and caring and that stuff. And you'll find people who are, who don't want to label you, don't want to, oh, that's just weird, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, this understand, loving her for who she is and wanting to work with her for who she is. That's really what comes down to.
Yeah.
Because I think it just makes a better workforce. And I'll leave you just one little anecdote
Sure.
around the group of people and how using language and all that's in colloquialisms. So I was, neurodivergent, one person with autism, one person with autism. But one thing
Hmm.
that tends to run true is nuance is difficult, very literal. So if you're
Yeah.
telling me like there's many ways to skin a cat, I'm looking for the cat,
Yeah.
right? Like, why are you using that term? Like, I don't
Yeah.
want it. Like, and
Yeah.
so, and these types of things. So I was telling a story about that and sort of the water cooler talk and all that stuff.
Mm.
And one of my senior managers spoke up to me and he says, all of those things that are a barrier, and this is because they don't get your conversation, right? Like it's
Right.
all of you gone into like you're talking to me about what's happening in the real world, but like and not using jargon or colloquialisms. I know what's
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
Um, and he goes to me, he says, it's a barrier for me too. He says, English is my third language.
Right.
Right. And so I
Yeah.
can't, I can understand when you're talking to me about work and,
Yeah.
very simple things. But if you start to use stuff like, think outside the box, where's the box? Right?
True. Excellent. Excellent example. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And that creates
Yeah.
more inclusive workspaces, all that to say, because then you feel
Yeah.
part of the group.
Yeah. Well, just a personal thanks for being a champion in this area and for your daughter. I wish the same. So
Thank you.
yeah, thanks for joining us and spreading the good work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you. Always will.
Awesome. Thanks so
Thanks for
much. Well,
having me on, Claire.
oh, my great pleasure. Thank you so much for listening. You can find all of the Happy Space podcast episodes over at happyspacepod.com. That is also where you'll find a link to our online community. Please leave a review over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in. And if you liked what you heard, please share. After all, doesn't everyone deserve a happy space?